P.
Is it that time again?
Postpod.
There it is.
So, I love talking to Herman. He's so smart. And so you were a bit late to the pod. So let me just kind of catch you up on some of the things that he mentioned, the wine bottle thing. So maybe let's just start there.
Let's start there. Yeah.
It was fascinating because, and you mentioned it too in one of your questions, there's this idea of a lag, right? And so he mentioned that there's this company that was a distributor, I think, for wine. And during COVID, at one point, they couldn't make any money because they didn't have bottles for their wine. So they went out and bought like 10 million bottles. And he had just come back from touring the warehouse where they store like 10 million bottles.
Oh my gosh.
So now they've got wine, or now they have bottles and they can sell wine. Yeah. So now they can sell their wine. But it's interesting because the lag effect, right? You had this instance during COVID where you couldn't get stuff, and a lot of people were affected by that.
Yeah.
Now they went and compensated to cover and make sure that they didn't run into that same supply chain issue. Mm-hmm. But they had to pay 50%, I think he said 50% higher price for those bottles. And so there's this constant like lag within all these systems of reaction time to try and compensate for a lot of inflationary things. And for me, one of the big takeaways was really just that we had been sort of lulled into this thinking of inflation is pretty standard at let's call it 2% plus or minus.
Right.
And now his thought is that we were as high as, I think he said 10% in the summer.
Wow.
And it'll come down to roughly around 5 or 6 if it follows a similar pattern to the previous inflationary periods. So if we're at 5 or 6 for the next 5 years, like that's twice as much, at least twice as much inflation, maybe 3 times as much inflationary costs.
Yeah.
That's going to impact businesses for the next foreseeable future.
What was interesting is that he was talking about organizations during these times need to maintain and be really agile and really flexible as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting takeaway because when you think about, pricing strategies and whatnot from a consumer perspective, there's only so much volatility that you're kind of willing to accept before you're like, hey, maybe I'm going to go to something else instead. So I thought from my perspective is like when I'm thinking and hearing about this, remaining agile, remaining flexible, and have some elasticity, if you will, I don't know how organizations can actually do that in a way that potentially wouldn't affect, some of their downstream processes. Because if you think about like inducing a new pricing action into a market, depending on the industry that you may be doing, there's a lot of time that goes into that.
Sure.
When I think about like the airline industry, like putting pricing in the market is not something you just like, okay, I'm just going to wake up today and it's going to be this.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of work that goes into that. So maintain that elasticity, if you will. I don't know if that's actually operational or can be operationalized in the same way. Of course, I understand the nuances, between industries, but I think it's how do you stay nimble and versatile in that state? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to start with, and I think the previous conversation that we had with Herman, we talked about price being probably the least talked about of the 4 Ps.
The neglected stepchild.
Yeah. And now I think maybe that's, if we think about the 4 Ps as the levers that marketers have to play with, price, promotion, promotion is the most common one probably, right. Place and product. There's a lot of ways just by thinking about the 4 Ps that a lot of levers that marketers have to pull, a lot more than they probably consider. And if price, in fact, is one of those things where majority of people aren't talking about it, then it could be a great tool for marketers to come up with new ideas and solutions, and invest time into like doing the market research to try and understand what's going on in the market. It's important, it's valuable because it does drive profit, which is ultimately what we're doing. We don't always have to pull the promotional lever, right?
Yeah.
You can create new product with bundling. You can create new product with just pricing strategy in general, or unbundling, as Hermann mentioned. So it's interesting to me because it opens up a lot more possibility to help a company be responsive to change.
Yeah, you know what? And maybe, in that, as marketers, we kind of, again, and I was stuck in that mindset is like, well, hey, from a marketing perspective, we're responsible for more of the promotion side. But you're right. Like the reality is if we retain that notion that we're the voice of the consumer inside of our organizations, then our influence spans genuinely like the 4 Ps. So how do we make ourselves more, if the right word is here, more, not available, I think that's not the right word, but making sure that we are driving that conversation as it pertains to all the Ps, then there is value. And I think what we're seeing, and I'm sure like you have same insights as well. One of the first things that happens during these inflationary periods is like marketing budgets tend to dry up. And, obviously any article you read, it's like, no, you have to maintain some level of pressure in the market where you're continuously advertising. I think it was Ehrenberg and Bass Institute, like in 2018, I think it was, they did a study that, the longer that you stop advertising, your average sale drops. I think like 16%, I think in the first year, then it goes after 2 years, like 25%. But at the same time, organizations still do that, right? Or they reduce it enough to a point where it's like, why are we even doing this? Yeah. So I guess where I'm going with this is like there's a balance here that needs to happen within organizations to maintain that. And Hermann said just at the end there, he's like, the CEO's responsibility is he's talking to all the functions equally on how to address inflation and kind of giving everyone that equal opportunity to think about what areas make sense to potentially, change strategies on or whatever. Yeah. So the only thing I would offer here is saying that don't think of inflation just from a pricing perspective. You have to think of inflation and how you combat that in an organization through all the levers that you have at your disposal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. A couple of things just as you were saying that made me reflect on the conversation. So one of the things that Hermann had talked about right at the beginning, just before you were jumping on, is that some markets or some industries are more affected than others. So as an example, he brought up travel. The people who are in the travel category, like vacationers and that kind of thing, are more willing to pay for travel than they are for some things, than general consumers are for things like, things that you get at the grocery store. They're looking to substitute lower cost items there in order to save that money to put into things that matter a lot to them. So that was kind of interesting. So not every industry is affected the same way.
That's true.
By inflation, which I thought was fascinating. And I think it's a good reason to do that research and gut check on, like, are people within the customer's willingness to pay within your industry, are they affected this, the same way that you would expect all consumers would be? So that was interesting. The second part was thinking about the price lever, and particularly probably B2B, where the salespeople manage price a lot more intimately. I think it's important that the marketing side also considers how you communicate value. So that's not just about lower cost, but it's also about like incremental value or benefits for the consumer or the buyer or the purchaser. Right. So they feel that there's worth in this, that it's worth it for paying a higher price, whether they know it's a higher price or not. But, increasing the transactional costs or the deal size or, that kind of thing, the profitability of every deal.
Yeah, he brought up Apple. What was it? He said like Apple can increase the price by 10% and likely won't affect their sales. Yeah. And it's like, thinking about the strength of the brand in that moment. This goes back to, my other points. Like you can't really go back on investments too much if you want to maintain that level of, mental availability, et cetera. So, it's interesting. Maybe they're not levers, but we think of all the different aspects of around pricing. And how you can combat that is almost like you need to take that one organization approach to assure like you're navigating the best you can. Research is important, and I'll be honest. I don't think I've worked for an organization where research is always front and center, and that doesn't mean it's they've been operating the right way. I think if you think about all the guests that we've talked to, research always keeps coming up, and I know it's something that I would change.
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I think it is really important for a whole bunch of reasons. But I anytime I think about this, there's Mark Ritson has a really great formula or discipline, let's call it, for a marketing approach. And it starts with market orientation. And there's a great diagram that's out there called Marketing Land that I think about all the time. And it really does start with like understanding the customer and understanding like all the things around them before you get into developing your targeting strategy, your segmentation, your targeting, your positioning, and then developing the product and so on and so forth. Because if you don't understand what's going on with the customer and their mindset, then you can make all kinds of decisions that may not land the way you thought they would, right? So it's a way of improving your odds of success just by spending a bit of time to understand the customer base to begin with.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the pause there. I'm just like, I'm thinking back to.
I was watching you thinking, it's like, this is good.
Well, I just, again, reflecting on my own experiences, is this I don't have a good reason why I didn't lean on research more. It was just not part of, I don't want to call it the vernacular, but maybe it is. Like we would use research at a very high level to help guide some big thoughts in terms of like the direction we're going. It would influence maybe the vision or the ethos of an organization. But outside of that, we weren't spending much time on the research side from the consumer perspective. Our heads were buried deep on a lot of the performance analytics that we were getting, and we were making decisions on that. And it's just, it's really interesting that the more and more people we talk to, it's the exact opposite. So I think when we're bringing it back from an inflation perspective, how to circumvent that from an organization, like talk to your customers, and then, work back from that and see potentially, what you can make better. You mentioned one of the questions, the bundling effect. It's great. What can that actually look like? Or the debundling, as Hermann called it. There are ways to kind of make sure that you maintain the mental availability, you're still pricing competitively, and you're able to circumvent the recession or the inflationary period here in a very manageable way.
Yeah, it's so much to think about. And just on that note too, like you're right. I don't think research has to be big formal market surveys per se. Looking at brand, like mostly whenever I thought about research, it was about brand awareness, consideration, and preference probably.
Yeah.
Those were like typically what I thought of as being the core tenets of any kind of research. Because that was usually, we brought in a research agency and that's what they did.
Yep.
But there's all kinds of, like you're right, customer feedback there's all kinds of stuff in research that you can do there. Understanding who the customers are, who the decision makers are, what are their choices, like what kinds of things do they buy? It doesn't have to be giant, big budget things. It can be also all that small data that comes in through all the different departments, which is what I think so smart why Hermann talked about involving all customers or all parts of the agents or of the company.
Of the company, yeah. So for you, what would be the biggest takeaway if someone to say, if you were to summarize this podcast into one like little soundbite, what do you think it is for you?
Yeah. Can that just be
I'm trying to think of the title. That's why I'm asking you.
I think that the one takeaway is that inflation is probably here for a while.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be double what it was, maybe triple what it was. So that 5-6%, and we need to think about the long-term implications of that and how we're going to manage cost and price in general to keep and maintain the profitability of an organization.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, because so how you affect, cost and price, but also, if we use the marketing lens on it, like your brand, right?
Right.
How are you going to make sure you're navigating? If this is going to be an extended, period, and it's going to jump, double, triple, or whatever the case may be, brands will definitely have an impact to this and the perception in the consumer. So anything that you've been able to build could all be lost if you don't look at about it and think about it the right way as you're managing this. So I think that's a very great takeaway. Yeah.
If there is a title, maybe it's something like inflation's here to stay. Now what? Like, ooh. You know what I mean? Like I previously to this conversation thought of inflation going up and then down, and we'll be back to that 1-2%.
Let's just go back
up to 3%.
Yeah.
But that's, by the sounds of it, not what's going to happen. So we need to think about and account for that change in how we kind of communicate and package the services, products and services that we have.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
V?
Dude.
It's good chat.
It was great chat. Hermann, thank you once again.
Yeah, thanks, Hermann. It was really fun. Thanks for, we had a whole bunch of complications to try to get this set up. So, but I appreciate that and appreciate all the work from his team in helping us coordinate and setting this up. So thanks to you guys too. Yeah,
it was awesome, man. Well, see you in the next one, man.
Okay, adieu.
Adieu. Have a great evening. A day. Jesus. Like, it's morning now. There is sun. God, I'm just having a day. Right. Be good, buddy.
Yeah, you too.